Once I discovered that Paul RUSESABAGINA, Mr. Rubengisa, and their associates with PDR Ihumera were engaging in these activities that seemed likely to be illegal, I turned everything over to U.S. law enforcement and cooperated with an investigation from approximately February of 2012 through early September 2012, serving as both an advisor and as an informant. During several of the meetings I had with Providence Rubengisa, they were also monitored by U.S. law enforcement. I want to mention something right now about that I think will impact potentially my credibility, and I want to be very transparent. I mentioned earlier that I came to Rwanda. I came to Rwanda in December of 2011 with another American scholar, academic, to attend a conference. It was my desire at that point, once I handed everything over to law enforcement, to transition to an academic role in support of Rwanda. So I had the hope at that time with the other academic that we were going to sign a contract with Rwanda to help in a more academic way understand the nature of the diaspora relations in a positive way. When I met with U.S. law enforcement, they asked me to postpone that, and I agreed to do that. After I was done working with law enforcement, I then signed a contract with the Rwandan government to provide academic support. Because of the nature of the work I had done with U.S. law enforcement, it was advised to me that I should register for the Foreign Agent Registration Act. I did not have any intention, and nor have I ever lobbied the U.S. government on behalf of the Rwandan government. Everything I did of my own accord. But because I had worked with the U.S. law enforcement, I wanted to be very transparent because the contract involved paying me for my scholarly work. The FARA application is public record. I will talk in just a few minutes about how that has been used against me and my credibility. Very quickly, I just want to say, and I only have 2 pages left. When I met with Mr. Rubengisa, when I was working with U.S. law enforcement, he ultimately disclosed much of what he was included in the emails, including his contact with the FDLR fighter and Paul RUSESABAGINA traveling to South Africa to meet with Mirwana Shayaka. I met with him on June 4th, 2012, at a restaurant in the Chicago metropolitan area. I took very detailed notes, and U.S. law enforcement was monitoring this meeting. During a discussion about the FDLR conflict in the region, Mr. Rubengisa stated to me, "You know, I was in touch with them for 3 years ago. I was communicating with them." I said, "Who?" And he said, "A guy from the FDLR." I said, "How do you know he was really the FDLR?" And he said, "I know it was, but then Paul, he messed it up. We were supporting and things like that, and I set the whole thing up. We always did that, made Paul look good. And then Paul went to meet with them in South Africa, and he made so many mistakes. And we think maybe Kagame people got involved. There are people in prison right now because Paul messed things up, so they stopped communicating. They tried to reach out to me again recently because I wasn't sure who it was, because Kagame people always trying to trick us, so I didn't respond. Plus, I don't have to do that now because we can just go through people we know and have them reach their family members. Like me, I have a guy I know who I'm in touch with who was very high up in Interahamwe, who was still in the jungle. He grew up in my dad's village. I can talk to him. So talking to the FDLR people is not hard. So that way, when it comes time to fight, they will be there with us. I said, so Paul wiring the money was true. And I asked, why did he do that in his own name? And Providence responded that Paul would always have other people do it, like him or Pio, but this time he decided to send it himself. Quote, because he is lazy, and thank God he is cheap because he sent so little. The most was 800. Thank God he is cheap. Close quote. During this same meeting, he also told me that he was the one who decided to merge PDR Ihumera to start the Rwanda National Congress, the RNC, because he believed PDR Ihumera would never be successful since they only had Hutu members. He shared that although they weren't initially going to have Paul Rusesabagina join them as a founding member, they did ultimately decide to have him be a founding member in 2011 because so many Hutus followed him and thought he was a hero. They later learned that Paul was working behind their backs to keep PDR Ihumera going and was talking to the editor of an extremist Hutu newspaper run by a Hutu Catholic priest in an attempt to undermine the RNC leaders. So at an RNC meeting in Brussels a few months earlier to my meeting with him, they forced his resignation. One thing I want to talk about briefly was a text message exchange, which I still have. On September 8th, 2012, Mr. Rubengisa and I exchanged texts about their attempts to recruit rebels from Rwandan universities to help start social movements in Rwanda by building cells inside the country. But they were concerned because of the many spies at the university. Providence wrote about a friend of his named Jamaica who was recruiting youth from a refugee camp in Uganda to enter Rwanda and create internal conflict. On September 18th, 2012, we had another text exchange, and he told me that Jamaica and Alexis, Bakunzibake, of PS in Burakuri, were recruiting youth from the Nakivale refugee camp, which was further north from the Rwandan border because it was, quote, more safe. I still have this text message on my phone, and I also have it printed out and saved as a PDF file. One more thing I would like to talk about, I'm almost at the conclusion, is one of the things I noticed throughout the emails was what I perceived as bullying by PDR Ihumera members and many of their associates and allies of anyone who challenged their ideology or any institution that worked with President Kagame. These aggressive tactics involve subjecting targets to online attacks, and in some instances involve the filing of civil lawsuits against them. Examples include PDR Ihumera members posting messages about books or articles in the Yahoo news groups that they perceived were critical of their activities or perceived as being supportive of the Rwandan government, and then asking members to respond in a coordinated manner. These were not posts debating the merits of the books, articles, or activities, though. Rather, in most instances, they involved online attacks that were often very personal, with many including the individual's employers or publishers in the post. My impression of these attacks was that they seemed designed to intimidate scholars, journalists, church leaders, etc. And from what I could tell, they were very well coordinated and they were highly successful. An example of institutional bullying was the filing of lawsuits against universities that invited President Kagame to speak, and including university administrators in the lawsuit. While these actions may not have been illegal, they did remind me of research on what's called swarming, which is defined as a form of negative online advocacy designed to intimidate and cause harm to individuals and institutions in an attempt to compel an outcome, which in this case was silencing critics and isolating the Rwandan government. One example of institutional bullying is a lawsuit filed against William Penn University in 2012 after the university announced that President Kagame would be a keynote speaker at the May 2012 commencement. The PDR network which at that point had merged with RNC, barraged the university with letters and a range of threats, mobilizing support through Facebook and various posts from blogs by organizations that frequently coordinated with PDR Ihumera Network, such as Friends of the Congo. The university did not withdraw the invitation for President Kagame to speak because they had 4 president scholars, students from Rwanda who were graduating. Mr. Rubengisa and Paul RUSESABAGINA organized a demonstration against the university and filed a lawsuit on May 11, 2012. And according to one of the emails, had President Kagame served during the commencement via his security detail. The lawsuit named co-defendants, the president of the university, Ann Field, the vice president of student advancement, Steve Noah, who had developed the Rwandan Scholar Program, an American attorney who often represented the Rwandan government in the United States, and Stephen Rapp, then Assistant Secretary of State. While I support any individual's right to express themselves through protest and other democratic means, what this network was doing was swarming targets, which again involves the virtual organizing of multiple groups to achieve a particular outcome. When swarming is facilitated by what's called smart mobs, a large networked group of people, it is often considered undemocratic because the goal is to intimidate people and organizations with threats, such as what is called nonsense lawsuits. I was so disturbed by these well-coordinated aggressive tactics that I did some research, some online research, and found various empirical studies about swarming and smart mobs. And I also found a publication by the RAND Corporation, a well-respected political think tank, referring to these types of tactics as a form of modern-day warfare. I mentioned before that it was my goal to work with Rwanda in a productive manner within my area of expertise. And I mentioned that I was asked by U.S. law enforcement to wait to sign a contract until the investigation was over, and I agreed to do that. And I signed a contract. I believe it was in October, 2012. I would have to look to confirm that. And I registered with FARA, again, a public document out of an abundance of caution, even though legally I was not required to do so because I was not advocating on behalf of Rwanda with US legislators. These tactics were used on me because at some point, PDR Ihumera found out that I was no longer on their side. And in the summer of 2014, which is when I registered in June of 2014. I may have my years wrong, but I know I registered. In the summer of 2014, when PDR Ihumera members and their American allies learned that I was no longer on their side, I was subjected to over 15,000 tweets calling me a Kagame agent and a paid Kagame spy. Most of the tweets included my home address. Some of them included death threats, and all of them tagged my then employer in what I presumed were attempts to cause me to lose my job. I want to conclude my testimony by discussing my motivations for being here today. Walking away, the moment I suspected I was in the midst of a network of genociders, genocide sympathizers, and apologists, would have been so much easier and would have allowed me to protect my career and my private life. As I prepared this testimony, I spent a considerable amount of time reflecting on my original motives, including reflecting on what prompted me to do what I did and to keep going when at times I felt like I was completely in over my head. I felt like I'd stepped into a minefield and I wasn't always sure what to do or how to handle the information I found. I am not a politician, nor do I have the mindset of a politician. And my choices may not make sense to some people involved in the geopolitics of this region. In all honesty, I believe that what motivated me to follow my instincts and take the risks I did relates to my gender. I am a woman and I am a mother. And while most combatants in protracted civil conflict are men, women and children by far bear the brunt of the long-term burden and consequences of violence in this world. And the impact of violence on women and children was and is very personal to me. As a woman and a mother, I feel a connection to women everywhere, including women in Rwanda. I hope this is obvious, but I want to say this very clearly. The Rwandan government never directed what I did. They never did. I did this on my own. They did not influence my testimony. These are my words. And as I mentioned before, I have all the emails and documentation to back it up. It's very hard for me to come here today, but I believed it's my duty as a woman and as a mother to speak the truth about what I know and to find the courage to do something about it, including coming here today and testifying before this court. And that's all I have.